Okay,
Oh,
perfect. So I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague at Kellogg here on the Startup Marketing Podcast, Gil Eyal. He is the president and founder of HYPR, which is a New York-based company started in 2013. He's raised $13 million in funding, Series A funding, and the exciting, amazing, cool news of this year, we need more good news this year, is that it got acquired. So there's so much, Gil, that I want to introduce you with. You're like the king of influencer marketing, I would say. If anybody's thinking about influencer marketing and they haven't talked to you, that is too bad for them, because you basically know everything there is to know. So we go way back to our time in grad school, and I know that, and you've just been such a great resource for when I was working in the startup world, and I would call you up and say, Gil, I'm experiencing this challenge right now. What would you do in this situation? And you were such a big help. So I'm so happy to have you on here.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be on here, and the feeling is mutual. I feel like one of the biggest things out of business school is you meet people that not only end up having great careers that you could learn from and kind of lean on, but also just great people to be friends. And even if you see each other like once a year or once every 5 years, it feels like it was just the other day.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump right in. I've got some things I know the folks that are listening to this will want to cover related to startups and the specific experiences that you've had in startup marketing. So first, let's start with give me your pitch about HYPR, something that a 6-year-old can understand. Who you're for, what problems you solve. Just a quick pitch.
Yeah, so HYPR came out of this understanding that celebrity endorsements were a big thing for many years, and they promoted a lot of big brands, but they weren't accessible to anyone who wasn't the biggest and most wealthy brands. And alongside with that was this transition where social networks were allowing individual people to become influential in specific areas. We wanted to build a tool that allows brands to, one, discover these people, to engage with them en masse because they needed to activate a lot of them, and 3, measure the performance of that engagement. So that was launched in 2013, and as you mentioned, sold in 2020, and became one of the bigger players in the space over that time.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, and one of the things, before we get into like the story really of how it all started, 2013, not too far from 2011 was when we graduated from grad school. So just curious how it actually began. But you almost like came up with a platform that mimics the way that companies are looking at data from like a digital marketing perspective. So doing that for an influencer marketing perspective. Can you tell me more about that? Like how did you come up with that, and how do you think about that?
I think it's, you hit the nail on its head. It's marketing 101, but it just had to be applied. And I think the early days we were walking around saying influencer marketing is just marketing. And I remember I had this article on Adweek that I wrote that became, a mini viral thing, because it said traditional marketing rules still apply to influencer marketing. You still need to understand what your messaging is. You still need to target a specific audience. You still need to find a channel, which is the influencer, that can convey that message. And we were just building tools that translated that entire process into activating influencer marketing. But really, if you spend a day in business school, that's probably the first lesson you learn about marketing. And so we didn't feel we were being so innovative. We just felt like, okay, there's an audience that really needs to work with these influencers, and it's very manual and labor intensive to do it today. Let's build tools that automate some of the process so that we can help them do it. But that didn't happen straight out of business school. Straight out of business school, I actually had a really, really hard time finding a job. We went to one of the best business schools in the world, and I was under the illusion that simply by going to that school, I would be recruited by all the best companies in the world and desired. But I came completely unprepared. My background was I was a lawyer. I was switching country, switching role in a language. My English wasn't as good as it is today, and I was doing very poorly on interviews, barely found an internship, ended up getting some offers for a job late in the game in the second year. But I also became involved with a startup that was heavily reliant on working with celebrities. So I ended up doing deals, even though it wasn't my role, somebody had to do it, doing deals with celebrities to promote the product. And it was very expensive, very inefficient. And all these rules that I learned in business school about identifying target audiences and measuring, all that didn't exist in the world that I was working in. And so when I left that company and started HYPR, I wanted to build a tool that I would have used, and that other marketers would hopefully connect with as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's true though. It's very competitive when you are in business school. When you get out of business school, you're with a lot of other bright minds. So do not believe what they say. Like nothing will be easier. It will only get harder. So.
Yeah, and it wasn't, it had to do, looking back, a lot of it had to do with my expectations, because some things that when I came in, my legal career was my entire resume, and I was very proud of it, but turned out that it wasn't really helping me get marketing jobs. So it required a rethinking of, where should I be interning? What should I be doing over the summer? And, a little bit like an entrepreneur, you come in with these assumptions, and the first year or two are just exploration and figuring out what customers want. And I realized I was the product. I had to change what I was selling, because people aren't looking for lawyers who want to do some marketing. They're looking for real marketers.
Right. That's absolutely true. So that's interesting. So what did you have to change about your approach and about your messaging from your prior life to the new one?
So a legal career is very driven by the types of clients that you've worked with and the size of the deals that you've closed with. A marketing career, especially when you come in for junior or mid-level roles, is really driven by the way you think, and they'll give you situations, they'll give you scenarios, they'll want to know, can you come out with a solution that is broader than the cookie cutter solution? Now, of course, there are certain things, that are just the rules. You have to know how to use, if you're going to be a digital marketer, you need to know how to use Google AdWords, right? And Facebook's advertising. It's just a tool that you need to know how to use. But you need to also show that you really know how to research and understand your specific audience and how you can create unique ways to engage them and hook them in. And those were just things that my resume and my interviews did not convey, because I was so focused on telling a different successful story. I probably would have gotten plenty of jobs at law firms if I were interviewing for law firms.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I also had a switch in my career. So I was going from consulting into marketing, and at first the brand management path. So I would have to agree with you that I think if I kept going the consulting route, it would have been way easier, but I wanted to get out of that. I wanted to go the marketing route. So really proving that you can do it, even though your background is in a different industry. That was a tough part.
That's very entrepreneurial. People don't think of it that way because you're in business school, and it's in some ways is the least entrepreneurial thing you can do, because you're getting $150,000 in debt.
That's right.
But you have to evolve, and as a startup, my theory is when you invest in early stage startups or you work with early stage startups, the odds of them actually doing what they told you by the time they exit, is very low, simply because they're going to find out a lot of things that they believe in but are not true.
That's right. Yes. I just to cover that part of the conversation, I talk to startups right now and work on stuff for them, like their website, and they're like, well, I don't know, maybe we should tweak that, maybe that's not the right way we should say it. And what I end up telling them is, it's fine for now. It's not going to stay this way. This is what it is now. This is your message now. This is your marketing collateral now. Trust me, it's going to change over and over and over. You're going to find new things. You need to be looking for those new things. You're not static. And that's the exciting part of marketing in the startup world. So tell me, how many people did you start with, and kind of how did your team grow? Like from when the company started in 2013, and kind of talk me through like when you raised your first series of funding and how your team grew from there.
So I was lucky. The company that I left, the investors and I had a very good relationship. So when I started, they gave me some initial seed capital to start with, and I had found a great guy who was a technical person to join me on the team. It was just the two of us for really the first more than a year. We tried to get into Y Combinator. We didn't make it. We tried to make it into, we tried to pitch investors left and right. We built this prototype that was kind of cool. We got a few customers who were willing to pay something for that prototype. And we just kept hearing no again and again and again from investors saying, we don't think this is big enough. You must be crazy because who's going to buy products from these random people online? And we were saying, you don't understand. That's where the market's moving. And we started asking ourselves, are we crazy ourselves? And we were lucky. I think probably this probably would have been my last or second to last meeting before I gave up. I was introduced to a guy named Charlie Fetterman who runs Silver Tech Ventures, which is, later on today, we'll talk about what I do today, but was the venture arm of the Silverstein family. And they were starting a program and he got it immediately. But he was way more sophisticated than we were. So, he looked at the idea and he said, Gil, you told me I've seen 50 companies pitch influencers, but you said something really interesting to me about this. You said that influencers are really a commodity. And that's interesting because most of the companies that I've met with, they want to get all the influencers to work with them and get the best influencers so that they're better than the other companies. But what you're saying, which is interesting, is that you don't really care who the influencer is, you care who their audience is, and you can find 50,000 alternatives because of the technology you have. So he liked the concept, and then he said, the only problem is that you're saying that, but you're running the other business. You're running the business everyone's running. So what's the story? And I said, yeah, it's easier to do it that way. And he said, it's like the joke about the guy who's like looking for a coin, and people say to him, what are you doing? He said, I lost a coin, so I'm looking for it. And they said, why are you looking over here? He said, well, did you lose it over here? He said, no, I lost it over there, but there's a street light over here, so it's much easier for me to look. And he said, if you know that, go focus on a business like that. So we had to give up a lot of what we'd done and restarted. And it was thanks to his support and investment. And it's not just him, it's the whole team at Silverstein. We were able to go and do that and build a much more robust and healthier business the hard way, right? Without taking the shortcuts of, okay, there's a customer who's willing to pay me. It's not exactly what I want to do, but I will do it because I need to show revenues. And it's a very confusing world as a startup. So I actually, at this point, totally forgot what you asked me, but
that's okay. That's going to happen. So I'm curious, like, how did your team, the size of your team, the different folks that were on the team, how did you start building it at the early stage, and then you got that seed funding, and then for the how did your team grow, and then you got the Series A funding? Just curious how that all worked out.
Yeah. So my belief was, as an early stage entrepreneur, you have to do all the sales because you have to meet the customers, you have to understand. So I only hired technical people initially. And I did a little bit of sales, and we had a product that was in a market that people didn't really want to meet us because it didn't. If you're working at an agency and everything's working, why do I need to go see this crazy startup guy? But when we did get in front of them, a lot of times we could see that we hit something with them. They're like, okay, wait, this actually makes a lot of sense. I could use it. But I needed to be there because I needed to see what resonates and what doesn't resonate. So we mainly focused on building the tech team. And once we felt like we found that initial fit where suddenly we had 3 or 4 clients who were willing to pay for it, and they were actually using it, not just willing to pay for it, but we could see on our dashboard that, wow, these guys are logging in every day and they're using this thing. And when something doesn't work, they're in touch with us and they care about this product and they want us to keep building it. That's when I started hunting for my first salesperson. I was lucky to meet a guy who had been an industry veteran and had been very passionate about the space, a big believer in the space, named Ryan Berger, and he's still with the company even after it's been sold. And he's turned out to be an amazing salesperson, bringing some of the biggest brands. But that was a little later.
That is so hard, by the way, to find amazing salespeople early on for startups. That is a very big pain point.
You have to be the amazing salesperson at the beginning, even though you're limited. And I'm not a salesperson. Like, I can tell you this, I get stomach cramps before I have to go into a sales meeting, and I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. And I don't know if I'm over schmoozing or under schmoozing or,
Yeah.
am I overselling? Am I underselling? Should I appear eager? Should I appear reluctant? I don't know. And some people, it comes so naturally to them. But you have to go through that process to understand how people react to your product. Because when you're an early stage entrepreneur, you're surrounded by people who really want to help you and they really want to make you feel good. And they know how hard what you're doing is. And they'll tell you all the good things that they see about your product. But until you have to ask them to write a check, and then you get the truth, right? So you have to be that person. Like if it's secondhand, you're not going to get that same answer. So we started selling, and the team was growing bit by bit, and then we went to raise capital. And
like, how many people is it? Just like a estimate of the number.
Try to remember around that time. This is probably 2015. So for 2 years, I've been running around. We were probably 6 or 7 people.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
At the height of the company, we were probably like 50 people, but we then raised our first big round, which was about $5 million. From some really, thankfully, luckily, really fantastic investors that were very supportive and helpful. And that gave us the ability to grow. We grew quickly to a larger number of employees and a much higher annual market MRR, so monthly recurring revenue. Our whole model shifted to subscription, so we had a healthier business. But it also became more and more competitive, as 2018, 2019 approached. So we were already a 6 or 7 year old business. It just became, or 5 or 6 year old business. It just became harder to differentiate. All these unique advantages that we had were being imitated, or companies were saying that they could do the same things, and we were in a constant race to keep up. So the company had to grow. We had to raise more capital, and it became this interesting situation where supposedly you've achieved everything you said you'd achieve, but every day is like a new grind starting over. So there's no like smooth sailing at some point with startups. At least I've never experienced it.
Right. It gets more choppier and choppier.
Yeah.
the more money you raise. Okay, so you raised that Series A, and then that was like 2018 or something like that.
That was 2015.
Right? Oh, 2015, and then you started growing the company more and more. You said at the height it was 50 people, and just recently, this April, it got acquired. So how did you get to that point? Like, how did that acquisition come about? Like, did you know it was coming? Did it take a couple of years, or was it fast? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So, it became more and more competitive in the market. And one of the things that we kept wondering is, are there vertical moves that we could make? And we partner with someone that's either bigger than us or in a similar business or a close business that could benefit from our technology. And we kept getting offers, but our investors didn't want to accept any of those offers. And I had been more interested in getting these and accepting the offers, because I've been running it for 8 years now, and I felt like growth wasn't happening as fast as I wanted it at this pace. And I knew that the next step would go and try to raise a $15-20 million round would dilute me significantly, would require me to work 10 times harder. And I don't know how fast I can grow the business because there's so much competition around. But our investors were completely no sale. And COVID came around, and there was this like window of like maybe 3 weeks where people thought the world was going to end and they just need liquidity. So my investors were saying, you know what, maybe we should consider some of these offers. And I took that as, all right, go accept one of the offers. There was one specific offer that I really, really liked the people, and I felt like they could do something really, really big with what we were doing. So that's the one I pursued, even though it wasn't the highest offer. But it was kind of a structured deal where there was cash involved, but also the ability to own stock in the newly formed entity that they acquired. So I'm one of the few beneficiaries of COVID, and unfortunately, I wish COVID never come along, but it did have for us like that positive spin.
Interesting. Okay, so there is some light this year for folks, such as yourself.
Especially if they're working on vaccines or something like that.
That's right. Yes,
the height of their career.
That's right.
Vaccines and influencer marketing. That's pretty much. Yeah.
That's pretty much it, really. Right? Yeah. Like not food delivery, or not
That one's
product
doing okay
delivery.
too, actually. I mean, at least if I look at my wallet, that space is doing okay.
Domino's is doing pretty well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we can't deny that. Great. So let's talk about marketing, because this is, the Modern Startup Marketing Podcast. So we have kind of talked more high level around the startup and your team and your growth, and then getting it acquired, which is super exciting. What would you say was the most recently, what was working really well for you in terms of marketing? Like, what marketing channels? And you could say influencer marketing, because
I
it
will.
so well.
Yeah.
But maybe there are other channels that you want to talk about. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the interesting thing, and I'm going to answer a little bit more broadly, but I used to do this all the time. I would go to like agencies where the people were media buyers, and I would say to people like, and I would speak in front of them, and I would say, "Who's been on the internet today?" And everybody would raise their hand, and I'd say, "And who's seen an ad today on the internet?" And everybody would raise their hand, and then I'd say, "What was it for?" And nobody raises their hands. Nobody remembers the last ad. Do you remember the last ad you saw?
No, I don't look at them.
Right.
I don't click on them. I don't. Somebody does, though, apparently, right? There are people that click on them, and
arguably, and we'll talk about that in a second. But
Yeah.
the point is, you sit in a room with people who spend millions of dollars on online advertising, and they don't remember the last ad that they saw. And if they do remember, it's typically one of two reasons. One is, or really one of three reasons. One is they got really annoyed. Like, how do they know that I am buying, cream to make my hair grow back, right? Like, how does this advertiser know, and why am I seeing this? That's one thing, and you're probably not going to buy the product because you're really annoyed at that. The second is, wow, this is amazing. I wanted to go on vacation, and that hit the nail on its head. That happens occasionally, And then the third is really like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting product, but if you check, they'll remember that they saw the ad. They won't remember which brand or where to go or anything like that. So you have to retarget them a lot of times. But concurrently with that, we're seeing a tremendous growth in the investment in digital marketing. And so what we're seeing is, I think for 2020 is the first time the US has spent over $100 billion on online marketing. The world has spent $400 billion on ads that no one is seeing. And if you think about the reason, it's because so many people are spending ads trying to mess with your mind. Now it does work sometimes subconsciously. And that's where it doesn't really catch when I ask that question. Where you might be on there, you're like, oh, okay, cool. You'll click on it at that moment. Or You'll see it so many times, it gets engraved in your head. Or you see enough coffee ads that you go into Starbucks and you buy coffee. So it's not completely ineffective, but it's definitely less ineffective than it used to be. And if you look at say different pages on the web, like the Forbes homepage or one of those, you'll see, and you have an ad blocker on, you'll see maybe 20 or 30 items get removed by the ad blocker. And you have to wonder, how did the page of a respectable publication get so many ads on it? And who thinks that somebody can consume 20 or 30 ads in one bite? And my guess is, somebody had one ad on it and it was making this many dollars. And then it started converting not as well. So he said, I'll throw in another ad. And then, that wasn't converting so well. So he said, okay, I'm going to hide that little thing where I'm going to make it pop up, and I'm going to hide that little X so you can't shut it down. And I'm going to get engagement, but you're getting this unhealthy engagement, right? You're getting these people who are like, okay, how do I click on this? Or I click on, some of that converts into sales, but as a brand, it's really harmful to your presence, because a lot of people remember you negatively, or like, how did this brand know about me this way? So
visiting those articles, I can only read this much text, because up here is the ad, and over here, and I'm like trying to get away from
and
the
it's
ad.
Going to slide up as you go, and you're literally regardless, you're not even on the page for the ads, right? So I think those channels were very effective early on because they were very good at targeting. We were used to a world where it's very hard to track. Nobody knew who saw any ads. You had an ad in the newspaper, you had no idea who looked at it. So they were very effective. They're still effective to a degree, but they've also become overcrowded and aggressive. And we have, as we go younger, people have literally evolved into ignoring them and not seeing them, and advertisers need to look in other ways. And that's where one of those channels is influencer marketing, right? But it's not the only channel. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of community building. There's a lot of event-based, which obviously now is harder marketing. There's a lot of experience-based marketing. Those things are very effective, and people are looking for ways to scale them because the one advantage and the real reason why people buy so much digital marketing the way that it used to be is that it's so easy to scale. Right, it's going well. I'm going to spend a lot more, and that's great. And my boss will be happy because it's costing us $8 to acquire a customer, and that's within our budget. So great. But in the long run, you really have to look for these other channels, and it's a really interesting world because when you sit in those rooms with those people, they'll leave that room and they'll continue doing exactly what they did before, which is continue buying these ads, knowing that people aren't watching them. So there's a very, very long learning curve, and it's part of the reason why I really became aggressive in my working with younger students and things like that and educating about this. Because I say you have to have agents of change, and there's a generation change in all these agencies, and they have the interns who come in, the early employees who come in, have to be aware of this, the idea that there are other ways to reach audiences that are far more healthy and effective.
That's right. I think that is such an amazing point. You've got these at startups, they're hiring young people, which is part of the draw for me. I loved being around people that are young and hungry and interested in building that fun culture. But then they end up thinking, okay, well, if this is how they want me to do it, then it's probably the way it should be done. But that's not really the right mode of thinking.
Well, you have two ways to stand out, right? When you go into a new place, whether you're a startup or whether you're an employee. And when I talk to the college students, I was talking about it. I said, there's one way, which is you're going to be the straight A student. You're going to go there, you're going to do everything they say exactly the way they do it, and you're going to do it a little better than the other people in the class. And then when they have to choose who to hire, they're going to hire you, and then you're going to sit there for 2 years, and they're going to give you a raise, and you get the next title, and maybe someday you'll climb up to the head of the pyramid. Or you can come in and tell them something they don't know. And then you might find yourself on a fast track to, then you're going to get the CEO saying, wait, what is this thing about influencer marketing? Hold on a second. Who's the person? Well, I don't care if they're an intern. Bring them here. I want to hear this story. So you can kind of choose your own path, and it depends on you. But as a marketer, you're marketing yourself. And if you think about how you would market a product, you would want it to be innovative. You would want it to be attention grabbing. So treat yourself the same way. Is my advice. And I don't have a colorful personality, and I'm not gonna show up in
Yes, you do.
No, but you know what I mean. Like, I'm not the kind of guy who's going to show up in a dress just to shock people, or I'm not the guy who's going to get be in the middle of the dance floor at a party, But it doesn't mean I have to be the wallflower too. You have something to say, and you can stand out in that way. And so I say to people, you don't have to necessarily come in and be the loudest, but if you have things that people are going to listen to and say, wow, you really made me think about something that I haven't thought about it that way. That's the best way to get into their, get some free rent over here. So they think about you, and they bring you into meetings, and they start appreciating your opinion. And so
that's right.
They have a huge opportunity, the people coming in, and the startups as well. As a startup, I always advise startups, if you went into a meeting and the person left the meeting saying, wow, I did not think about it that way, you have a much better chance of closing the deal.
Absolutely. The other thing I was going to say is, besides just bringing your opinion, also something cool you can do, because startups are lean and scrappy, and you can always find a way, especially these days, to figure it out and not spend a ton of money, is to try it and then show the proof. Like, you did it a different way and it actually worked. So that's something I think that founders, CEOs, the exec leadership team is totally open to hearing. And I'm totally with you there.
And it's kind of tough, I say this to founders a lot of times. If everybody gets your idea immediately, you're probably not doing something that unique. Like if you come in and you say, yeah, this is what we're doing, and everyone's like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, cool. It's probably not like groundbreaking. The challenge is that if people are saying, wait, you're crazy, then you're either crazy or you're really just smarter than they are. So there's a challenge there of trying to figure out, do I really understand this business better than they do? Or am I just really on a crazy idea? And that's where you want to surround yourself with people who are, who've gone through it, who can think with you and go through a thought process to tell you, are you a genius or are you
Crazy.
Just crazy, but it's not really being crazy. It's just, have you made the right adjustments to finding the way
That's
to do
right.
it?
That's right. So we were starting on the path of talking about marketing for HYPR, and as part of that, I'd asked like what channels, especially like most recently, have been working really well. And I know you want to talk about influencer marketing, so feel free. But how, like, going on a deeper level of exploration here, how do you use influencer marketing, if that's what you want to talk about first for HYPR?
Well, let's talk again. I'll answer a little more broadly. I think influencer marketing is a way to get attention. And I think marketing starts with getting attention. So you can make the most beautiful ad, but if nobody sees it, what's the point, right? So when I think about marketing, I really think about who is the audience, and then what can I do to get their attention? And, long before my influencer marketing days, I had this system that I called the grenade. Which basically what it does is, I'll give you an example. Okay, let's say we're targeting people who love Oprah Winfrey, right? And and we want to get them onto a website. One way to do that is to go the traditional route and say, okay, this is Facebook. I'm going to buy ads. I'm going to target people that they say love Oprah Winfrey, and I'm going to show them the ads a million times, and some of them will click on it and they'll get to my website. Or I can go to the Oprah Winfrey chat group with an account that says, I don't understand why you guys like Oprah Winfrey. I think she sucks. And that account has a link next to it that said that with the website that I want to promote, for example, or their own website with ads to other websites. The result is immediately that I have a different, I create this negative feeling with them, but I'm also going to get them all to clear out of the room and see, who is this guy who is saying that Oprah Winfrey sucks. So I drive traffic. And I always used to call it a grenade, because you put in that message and you immediately see like motion to your website, because people are like, who's this person and why are they saying this, and what's going on. And so it's a different funnel, but influencer marketing in a way is an extension of the grenade, right? Because the way people do influencer marketing, which I think is not very effective, is they'll say, hi, I'm this influencer and I love this product, #ad, which is not very effective. If you think about the way advertising is really effective, it's when it's really believable and it makes sense. Mm-hmm. So if I told you, you could pick one of two things, Britney Spears to promote Pepsi, or Michael Jordan to promote Nike shoes, most people would say, well, I think Michael Jordan for Nike shoes, because he can wear the shoes in a game, and if he's wearing them in a game, they must be really good, because he's not going to wear bad shoes to a game. And by the way, he's probably a pretty good expert on what shoes are really good for athletes, because he's been one for 30 years. And while I do believe that Britney Spears likes Pepsi, she probably likes a lot of drinks. There's no real correlation. So influencer marketing has to be ingrained into the advertiser. It has to make total sense. As a fan, you have to look at it and say, I'm not being sold to, because of course this influencer would love that product. This is a product that's all about sustainability and environment, and this influencer, I've known them for 10 years, that's all they talk about. Or this helps women. With the other company we just saw, it helps women with hair loss after the age of 40, and I know that the influencer that they're using, they're the spokespersons for that. They've always talked about it. They've shown, and not only that, they're showing me what's happened with them using the product. So it requires a much deeper integration. And I think, generally speaking, with marketing, if you're doing it just by the book, you're not, at this point, it's overcrowded. You're just going to land in a very overcrowded space. So you have to always be thinking a step further, or thinking about how you bring in an approach that creates a different level of attention. So what did we do with HYPR? Now is a deep secret. You're not gonna. I don't think I've ever told this story, but this is a true story of what we did. So HYPR, what it would do initially, the initial very, very basic product, would scan an influencer, would take a sample of their audience, and then it would analyze that audience, and it would say things like, okay, you're followed primarily by men or primarily by women. They're of this age group. They're located in these places, and they're I don't know, they're 10% of them is fake. And so this is an industry that up until that point, people would buy based on followers. Say, oh, this person has 1 million followers, I'm very excited. And what we said is, well, here's Kim Kardashian, who's got 100 million followers, but only 70% are women, so you already lost 30 million followers. And then only 28% are in the US, so that's down to like 20 million followers. And then her engagement rate is actually just 1%, so your post is going to be seen by 2 million followers, or whatever the math is. And then
10% are fake.
Right. And then, by the way, 10% or 50% are fake. Depends on. By the way, in Kim Kardashian's case, it's not a good example because obviously she's very strong. But plenty of influencers. We kind of we didn't make anything up, but we were delighted to see that they were selling bullshit, because by them saying HYPR is terrible, they were selling us, because the people buying their services were already somewhat suspicious. So when they would say, "Oh, you can't trust HYPR," this is my real data, and we came in and say, "Look, we have no beef in this fight. We're just giving you the data that we have according to our data. 1, 2, 3." That was a great marketing channel for us. And in the early days, that's what got the viral spread in the industry, where it was like, I worked with this influencer, it didn't go that well, and now I looked at the HYPR report and I kind of see why.
So the channel is almost like the channel is the report that you built that could prove
but
that
the influencers, by having a large audience and saying that we're terrible, we're creating visibility for us. And we knew we weren't terrible. But the only reason we were able to do that is because of the realization that they are a commodity, right? If we didn't accept that as a truth, then I'm sorry for the people
that's
walking.
okay, no problem.
So if we didn't accept that as the truth, and we were like the other companies who were trying to get all these influencers to work with them, we wouldn't be able to use that as a channel. So just like really anything, it initially created a lot of like fear within our investors. You're going to get in fights with some of these influencers, but the approach was, look, if we are going to be the company that tells you the truth, and we're going to help you make decisions, we're going to run into some fights. So we did, and it created, but it's almost like the Pepsi challenge, by Coke acknowledging the Pepsi challenge and giving Pepsi visibility. So they gave us visibility, and they actually made us on their level where we were this small startup. None of them would ever imagine there were literally 5 people in one room, because we couldn't afford a second room, crunched together. Today, obviously, nobody could do that. But we literally sit shoulder to shoulder on like this line of desks.
Yeah, that's
and we
amazing.
were the ones causing that stir for people who have 50 million followers.
Yeah. So you almost like, you're like, oh, this is great. They're creating this buzz for us, right? It's almost like the free PR with you disagreeing with them, and they then calling you out and saying that this is not, like, why are you looking at HYPR? This is not a good company. They created that buzz, and then people got interested.
You always want to be a David versus Goliath. That's a great situation to be in. So find out who your Goliath is. If you're playing against Microsoft and you can make them the bully, especially if they play along, which is even better, then great. There's an old story about I forget which ice cream company, the Pillsbury, and how they would stop other companies from competing with them. And the companies ran a campaign called "What's the Pillsbury Doughboy Afraid of?" and it was making fun of the Pillsbury Doughboy. But by being this, people want to align with the underdog. If you watch a sports game and you don't know any of the teams and one of them's behind, you're going to root for them to come back. Almost always, it's just human nature. We see someone who's the weaker person, we root for them and we want to help them. So. We all want to make our startup look like the most successful and most powerful thing in the world, but sometimes it's very beneficial to have this big enemy who's trying to destroy you, whether it's the government or, the Russians or, I don't know, pick.
There are lots of enemies out there.
Pick your bad guy for your industry and your generation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so what about, from a marketing standpoint, the challenges? Like, what was really difficult to figure out, I guess, throughout the course of HYPR growing, or maybe most recently, what was the biggest marketing challenge you guys had?
I think, the biggest thing for us was that we were kind of early for our industry, meaning things that today are common knowledge, like everybody's doing influencer marketing. When we started it, we had to explain to people why they would do it. And they literally thought we were crazy. They said, why would I hire some random person on Instagram when I can just go on Facebook and pay this much money and get this many views? And even though we thought we were doing a good job explaining it, there was no real motivation for anybody to be the first mover. If you're somebody who works for an agency and everything's working and your job is safe and you're lined up for a promotion, do you really want to be the guy who brings in this software that helps you find influential people online? And you have to find people who are a very specific character. And so Ryan, when we brought him on board, the salesperson, he was very good at finding those people and building a relationship with them. And sometimes it took a year to close a client because there were so many gatekeepers we had to go through who didn't want to try something new or didn't want to take a risk. Yeah. So
who was your primary target, like your ideal person?
Primarily advertising agencies and brands, and the marketing person and brands. The challenge was obviously with agencies, a lot of them were old school and they were happy with the way things were going. With brands, they didn't want to do it on their own. They wanted us to run the campaigns for them. So we had to make a decision to give up a lot of money by saying, no, we don't run campaigns. You have to learn how to use the system and run campaigns on your own. And we probably gave up millions of dollars in business, but I didn't have the people to run the campaigns. I could work 30 hours a day and I wouldn't be able to do all of it. So
yeah. So the $1 million question then is, because I know a lot of startups that have come up with like ahead of our time ideas, right? And changing status quo. How did you do it? How did you get them to get interested in the idea, to see the pain points, to see a different like world that's opening up before their eyes? How did you do it?
Yeah, so you have to, and this goes around to fundraising as well. But if you're ahead of your time, whether that's the good scenario, a lot of times you're behind on your time, right? So the good scenario is you're ahead, or if you're perfectly timed, great. But that's very rare. If you're ahead of your time, that's probably the situation. You might be ahead of your time by a month, and you might be ahead of your time by 10 years. So, and we've seen this with driving cars, like all these companies that have technologies for driving cars, self-driving cars. You don't see them on the street. So you have to flip the bowl over, right? When you have investors who are all telling you, yeah, I'll join when somebody leads, or, let me know how it's going and I'll join. You have to create a situation where the train is leaving the station. And so the biggest thing that you have to do as a marketer when you're dealing with an industry that's refusing to catch up is make people feel like others are already doing this. So I did a very aggressive, very, very aggressive social media campaign. We were spending an enormous amount of time and effort on PR and social media. Probably posted at least 2-3 interviews a month during those years. If you Google them, a lot of them are still online. Spoke at conferences nonstop. And what I made sure to do was 2 things. One, I made sure to talk about how all the big names are using it. So when we signed a big name company, we would give them half off just so we could use their name. And we would talk about how their competitors are already doing this. And what, you don't offer this? So we shifted it away from, let me introduce you to this new technology, to, you don't have this? You know that, everybody else has this. One, in the converse, and in the articles that I wrote, it talked about how this market is really suffering and it's going to escape the people who don't play. I started going to universities that recruited to, I teach at Wharton, but really any university would let me speak. At the time I was doing them maybe once a week, come to speak to their marketing classes and tell them, you guys need to be the agents of change within your industries. And a lot of those people now work at agencies who are now clients of HYPR. So it's kind of but I would literally, I became an evangelist for this everywhere, but you have to shift it to a place where you're not trying to convince people that there's a revolution coming. You're trying to convince them that, what do you mean? You're about to lose, you're about to be so far behind, you better wake
you
up
missed the boat
really quickly. And you have to do the same thing with investors to a degree, right? So as a founder, it shouldn't be too rare for you, but you have to have somebody. If it's you, great. If it's not you, somebody who's ready to like stand on stage and yell, what's wrong with you? You 6 more months and you're out of this market. Everybody's going to have this. And it's a very hard thing to do sometimes. But no matter what market you're in, you have to convince them that now's the time. If you don't, then they're always going to kick the can down the road.
That's right. Awesome. Okay, so then my question to you is like, what's your big aha marketing moment this past year? It's been a crazy year. Maybe you were thinking of like one thing at the beginning of the year, then you changed your thinking to, after March. Like what's your big aha moment? Maybe it's a trend or it's a tactic. Would love to hear.
Yeah, I think, and so I made an interesting thing. Once I sold the company, I joined Silverstein Properties to help them think about what the office, what the residence should look like.
Tell me more about Silverstein Properties, because people listening might not know what that is. And yeah.
So Silverstein Properties is one of the biggest real estate companies in New York. It owns the World Trade Center, which is, the big thing, but about 40 million square feet of office space and residential buildings. And, like any company, it's been affected by the challenges of, one, people moving out of New York, not feeling comfortable coming back to the office, and really a whole slew of challenges that come out, not comfortable riding the subway, and anything you can think of is playing against real estate right now. Except for real estate in green areas where nobody is sick. And so most of the companies in this space have reacted with what you would imagine, which is dropping prices, right? Either dropping prices or giving out really, really cheap concessions, with this idea that, okay, if we, it's pretty simple, the demand curve, the supply and demand curve, we'll just go lower on the curve and we'll get people who are willing to pay less. It's not a healthy strategy in real estate because, as you may know, there are laws that limit how much you can raise rent. So if somebody comes in at $2,000 instead of $3,000 a month, and you can only raise it by 2% every year, you're stuck with that person for a long, long time. It's not like, okay, I'm going to give a discount right now and I'll do it. And the biggest thing I wanted to bring into the industry, and I think we're looking at is the concept of value versus the concept of price, right? So yes, I'm aware right now that in New York City, there's an abundance of apartments, and I could probably get more for my money. Now, as somebody who can sell to you, can say to you, well, I know you have $3,000, but I'll give this to you at $2,500 because I want to close you. Or I could say, you know what, $3,000 is also going to get you an apartment that otherwise would have cost $3,400. And in your mind, the value is the same. For me, I didn't have to drop prices. Or I could say, you know what, I'm going to give you, here's something we're doing in our buildings. It's not public yet, but about to release. The Pampered package. So you live in our buildings, you never have to clean. We'll send you a cleaner every week. We'll do your laundry every week. And by the way, here's $5,000 to a ghost kitchen. We can order food every night, so you never have to cook. And that in alone, that would cost me similar to the concession, but I don't have to give a concession. My price point stayed the same. And so I'm not affecting my long term future. So part of it has to do with like how the positioning that you choose in marketing is so important. If you look at industries like airlines and others where price is always the place where people go, and then you look at companies like Virgin, who's an exception in that airline, you see that there's always room to think about it differently. And even in real estate, which is like one of the most ancient, slow-moving industries in the world, there are probably a lot of opportunities to do that as well. So the same thing for your startup. Yes, you need somebody who knows how to run Google Ads. Yes, you need somebody who knows how to work with Outbrain or Taboola. But don't let that be the only thing that's running your startup. Like, you need to stand out in a way that really creates attention. And it doesn't have to come to you like right away. That's what Anna's for. Like sit with Anna or sit with someone like me and say, how do I really stand out? And like just chuck ideas out there. And 90% of them will be terrible, but that might light a spark that then leads you into doing something special.
Yeah, I think that's the fun part of being in marketing, is thinking through the creative ideas of how to help companies stand out, and especially B2B, where people fall back on like the traditional and the old ways of doing things, and it doesn't have to be that way. It could be really fun. So
couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Great. Well, we covered a lot of ground here. And I know that, so I'd love to ask you, some other stuff that we had highlighted here. So if you were to create a podcast, what would it be about? What would you want to talk about? I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be, I would look for brilliant marketers. I would look for like who's done something really unique. And every once in a while, these stories come out. Even if you look at, say, you remember the Fire Festival, which, if you remember, was that festival with influencers, and everyone, it was a complete failure, but the marketing was genius. And nobody gives the marketing the credit it deserves, because
the story was so crazy and bad.
but nothing would enable such a huge failure if the marketing wasn't so great, So what they did was really interesting. They did the exact opposite of what you would think. They just had all these influencers post an orange square on their page. They didn't promote anything, but everybody was like, "What's this orange square?" And they're like, "Oh, it's a secret. We'll tell you in a week." That created so much buzz, and like an orange square is the exact opposite of what any marketer would tell you to do. They would tell you need a beautiful, colorful, blah, blah, blah video of what's going to happen. And it's the other way around. And it's really, really smart. So I would highlight those kinds of stories. I would talk to those kinds of marketers. And I would say, how did you come up with this idea? And what brought you to that point? Now, I'm way too lazy to do that, so I'm never going to start that. So if anybody's listening wants to start that and have me come on as a guest every once in a while, I'm happy to do that.
Good to know. You're also extremely busy, so that makes sense. Let's see. I'd love to hear just about the family. Like, how's the family doing? How are the kids doing? How have you guys managed to stay sane throughout this time and to continue to be productive, and in some cases, like maybe overly productive during this year?
I think, for me, it's been amazing because I get to see the kids, something that as a startup founder, you leave before they go to school and you come back like for bedtime, because even then you kind of ran out of the office just to make it for bedtime. And now, we're in the same place, and they'll disturb my phone calls. I'll find out that they've installed malware on my computer and all kinds of stuff, trying to see their TV shows or whatever they want. But for me, it's amazing. I grew up with, in a family that we spent a lot more time with our parents than we used to spend with our kids. So I don't know how I'm going to keep that going, but it's definitely something I want to keep investing in. And then, my wife and I work, she has her desk. You don't see her, but she's like really just down the block. And we go into the office every once in a while, but mostly we stay home. So it's been, for me, other than never seeing my parents and, not being able to travel anywhere, there've been some positive, like, day-to-day sides for it.
Awesome.
Which has been nice. Yeah.
Well, Gil, this has been great. I love catching up with you. I always have, and I appreciate you coming on to the show and talking about your startup. And we talked about some great nuggets. So I can't wait for the show to release and for other folks to hear about it. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And if anyone wants to connect with me, you'll post my contact info, or
I will post all the information so people can reach out to you. Absolutely.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Gil.